Okay, welcome to the Otherppl Show, a weekly podcast featuring in-depth interviews with today's leading writers. I'm Brad Listi here in Los Angeles. It's great to be with you. I appreciate you tuning in. I hope you're hanging in there. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen, and you can follow me on Bluesky and Instagram. My guest today is Jessa Crispin. She has a new book out called What's Wrong with Men? Patriarchy, the Crisis of Masculinity, and how, of course, Michael Douglas films explain everything. It is available from Pantheon. I just loved this book. I thought it was great. It subverted my expectations a little bit. If I'm being honest, you pick up a book and it's called What's Wrong with Men? Part of me was nodding. I was like, oh yeah, what is wrong with men? And then part of me was maybe cowering a little bit, like, uh-oh, like I'm about to be attacked. But that's not what this book is. This book is funny. It's very smart. It contains a lot of great writing through a feminist lens. It contains a lot of great cultural criticism and social and historical context. And it makes a very convincing case that the movies of Michael Douglas explain whole when it comes to the crisis of modern masculinity and what has happened to patriarchy over the last several decades. It's a very insightful and interesting and provocative book, and I loved it. And I loved talking with Jessa Crispin. That conversation is coming up in just a moment. So I have to give an obligatory reminder that I have an email newsletter. I would love it if you signed up. I think that sounds like a great idea. You can do so over at bradlisti.substack.com. And I want to plug my new company, which is set to launch in about a month, give or take. It is called Deep Dive, and it specializes in the creation of long-form educational audio. The debut course from Deep Dive is called How to Write a Novel. I am the host of the course, and it features more than 50 hours of never-before-heard conversations with dozens of today's leading writers, including people like Emily St. John Mandel, Steve Almond, Pur Chistahakpur, Madeline Lucas, Vivi Ganeshananthan, Matt Bell, Antoine Wilson, Deb Olin Unferth, Stephen Graham Jones, and so on and so forth. There's never been a writing course quite like this one, and I can tell you now, for the very first time here on the Otherppl Show, that when How to Write a Novel becomes available, it will be available for a limited time only for just $297. That's the price at the outset, and it will get you more than 50 hours of insight and instruction and access to the minds of some of the best writers working today. So I feel like that's a really incredible value, and I'm excited to share the course with you soon. So stay tuned. All right, my guest, once again, is Jessa Crispin. Her new book is called What's Wrong with Men? Patriarchy, the Crisis of Masculinity, and how, of course, Michael Douglas films explain everything. It's out there now from Pantheon. Jessa Crispin is the author of several books, including Why I Am Not a Feminist Manifesto, The Dead Ladies Project, and My Three Dads. She is the editor and founder of The Culture We Deserve, as well as the host with Nico Rodriguez of the Culture We Deserve weekly podcast. In 2002, Jessa Crispin launched Bookslot.com, one of the first and most beloved literary websites of its era. It ran for 15 years. Jessa is originally from small-town Kansas, and she now lives in Philadelphia. This is her first time on the Otherppl Show, and I couldn't be happier to have had the chance to talk with her about her excellent new book. So let's get to the conversation. Here I am with Jessa Crispin, and her new book, one more time, is called What's Wrong with Men?
It's just, I think I needed something concrete. I needed something that existed in the real world to hang it on, right? So that it wasn't just me ranting about men for 300 pages or whatever. Like, just diatribe. And also something to remind me of the stakes that these are real people. Men are real. Men exist in the world.
Yeah.
They have some problems sometimes. But yeah, I needed, I think, a kind of figure to hang my empathy on, to hang my affection on, to keep them in the center so it wasn't devolving into a kind of, when a feminist starts talking about men, it can go a little weird. So I wanted to remember these are people. They have specific contexts in which they're existing. They are lovable. They are worth the time. They are worth the energy. And I love Michael Douglas. I love Michael Douglas so much. So my love for Michael Douglas can be spread around to other people as well.
I think that you're bringing up a great point about this book, and it's something that I really appreciated about it, is that it is very pointed in its critiques, but it is also a book that takes into consideration the humanity of men. It's not just a screed. And sometimes works of this kind can be that way, or I can feel like, oh, wow, this person just doesn't like men at all. That's not the case with you. And I'm curious too about this framing with Michael Douglas and when it began. Like, what was the point of origin? Like, at what point did you realize that his work was kind of the Rosetta Stone for like how we can think about like modern crises and masculinity and the patriarchy and all of it?
Well, it was a pandemic, right? And I feel like discourse around masculinity, around men in general, became really kind of deranged during the pandemic. You're inside your house, you are not talking to or dealing with real people. You're dealing with phantoms in your own head that you are pretending are real people, treating other human beings as if they're paper dolls, which allows you to say terrible, terrible things, right? And so you would see these hashtags of like, men are a cancer, or men should die, or, whatever it was. And it was coming out of a frustration and an aggressive response that I completely understand, right? I absolutely understand why a person needs the cathartic moment of, you know what? Men should just fucking die. Men are in charge of the things that are keeping me from living a life of any pleasure or interest whatsoever. So why don't they just fucking die? And then my life will improve so much better. So I understand like how you get stuck in that head space. And then I understand how you go to social media to say it out loud in front of other people. I just don't think it's useful. I don't think it's productive. And so I was watching the movie Basic Instinct a lot during the pandemic. Basic Instinct is a movie about this. It's like, what if men just died? What if that made everything better? And I found the Michael Douglas figure in that movie just so absolutely wildly fascinating. And I wanted to understand it better. So I just was like, what else was going on at the time, right? What other things was Michael Douglas doing? And so it just sort of spread out from there, basically.
So it started with, it's the Nick character, right, in Basic Instinct.
Yeah, he plays Nick a lot, but yeah, this particular Nick I found very interesting.
Well, there's a section in your book, like the Basic Instinct section in your book, where you're talking about, I think maybe you're telling some version of this origin story, or you're just talking about watching the movie and the nightclub scene where Michael Douglas shows up to me. Is it Catherine? Is that the Sharon Stone character?
Yeah, Catherine Trammell.
Catherine Trammell, yeah. So he shows up at this nightclub in this deep V-neck sweater, which every time I've ever seen Basic Instinct has struck me. I've always been like, wow, that's a choice. Like no t-shirt underneath it. It's just a plunging V. And it's a very funny part of your book where you talk about this sweater. Can you just maybe share your thoughts a little bit for listeners who might be aware of the sweater or might not be.
Yeah, the most upsetting sweater in cinematic history. Yeah, so he decides he's going to go get Sharon Stone, right? He's going to go seduce Sharon Stone. And she's at the club with all of her friends and all of her drugs, right? And he decides that what she's lacking in her life that he's going to provide is a middle-aged man in a V-neck sweater. He's wearing a sweater to the club, right? First of all, just he's, what am I going to wear while I'm dancing? I'm going to wear a sweater. Sure. Okay, man. Secondly, it's so clearly synthetic fibers. It's so clearly just absorbing body odor, cigarette smoke, spilled beer, whatever else is going on, whatever terrible cologne he bought at the drugstore on his way, whatever odors are coming out of his car, which is also clearly its own bouquet. That's like deep in the fibers. Those are never coming out. And it's just like coming off of his body. It's like a non-color, doesn't flatter him whatsoever. The shape is weird. The V is too deep. So it's showing off too much chest. So essentially, and the funny thing is, like, since I wrote that, I have had a couple guys come up to me and say, I don't understand what the problem with the sweater is. It's a pretty good sweater. And I'm like, you need help. You need gay men, you need women to like you more because they would explain some things to you. But yeah, it's just such a clear indication that he doesn't think he has to think about this, that he's so arrogant that he thinks he can go into a space that is not for him and not have to think about adaptation to that space. He doesn't have to think about what he might have or not have to offer the woman that he's trying to get in bed with. He's just like, I don't have to put any thought into this. Take it or leave it, ladies. And I find that it just like indicative of everything.
Yeah,
everything that's going wrong.
Yeah, it's like there's something emblematic about it when you like dig down into it. And I think before we go any further, I want to ask you, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm hoping you can at least paraphrase your definition of patriarchy, which you put down in the book, because I think it's useful so that we're all kind of on the same page in terms of what we're talking about when we talk about patriarchy.
Sure. I'll try to remember what I said. But basically, patriarchy is a system of ruling a society where rights and resources are preserved specifically for men and withheld from women. That's patriarchy. My theory of the book is that patriarchy no longer exists, and it hasn't existed since, the 1970s, which is not that very long of a time, I understand. And we haven't really formulated something to replace it other than like a zombie form of patriarchy. But women now have rights. They now have access to resources. And so we don't have equality, but we don't have patriarchy. It's something else, something that's sort of more difficult to pin down and look at.
Which is what your book attempts to do. And I think like one of the takeaways from the book is that when like feminism was taking hold and women's rights were advancing and, patriarchy was ending, there was this sense that women were being liberated, right? There were new opportunities, new rights, new access for women that previously didn't exist. But men were also liberated from patriarchy in ways that were never clearly defined at all. It wasn't really even discussed, at least not in my experience. And so there is a destabilization that happened. And I think in the aftermath, maybe a confusion about what was going on that the films of Michael Douglas reflect and the character choices that he made back in those days reflect, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he's clearly in several of the movies trying to behave as if he's still living under patriarchy, as if his wife can't just divorce him if she's sick of his shit, right? that he will have the power in whatever situation he walks into. That doesn't work, and he's surprised every time. So in a movie like Fatal Attraction, right, like he's behaving as if, first of all, that his wife can't leave him if he's unfaithful to her, that his family can't fall apart, and that she can't be fine without him, but also that he can make Glenn Close go away, because traditionally the mistress, the sex worker, the secretary, the courtesan, whatever it was that the powerful man used and got bored with and tried to discard, those people went away because for the most part they were scared of being blackmailed or having their access to resources limited or being murdered. I mean, women are still always constantly worried about being murdered by the men that they cross. But now that you can get a divorce, now that you can keep access to money, build a career, etc., that threat doesn't hold as much weight. So he keeps trying to make her go away, and he can't make her go away. And that's why the male director of the movie decided to turn it into a horror movie. It's like, what if the bitch you're trying to kill just can't be killed? Like that is a horror movie in certain men's imaginations.
Well, this brings to mind a question that occurred to me as I was reading. I think I kind of know the answer, but it's worth asking anyway, like how conscious the creators of these films were at the time, and how conscious Michael Douglas might have been in his choices as an actor of the implications along these lines. Like, was he completely oblivious to it, do you think? Or do you think he had an idea of what he was doing?
I don't think that he was oblivious, but I don't think that he really understood all of it, right? And certainly it depends from director to director. Like Adrian what's his name? How do you pronounce his name? Adrian Lyne, who directed Fatal Attraction. Like that's terrible. That's a bad movie. I mean, it's a great movie in the sense that it functions as a movie, but it has horrifying politics. That one, I would say, oblivious. Something like Basic Instinct, like Verhoeven was very clear and said in interviews that he always thought that there was something very evil about Michael Douglas, and that's what he wanted to put on screen. And just be really direct about it. What does Michael Douglas represent? Evil to Paul Verhoeven. And so it just depends on the person. But everything that I've read about Michael Douglas, the person, and I really wanted to not have him as a person in the book, right? But you have to read a lot of stuff. But everything I read from him, as far as interviews and so on, he was a producer. He's very savvy. He understood a lot of what he was doing and how he was making certain choices. I don't know that he was consciously deciding to be the representative for the fall of patriarchy. Probably not, but thank you for your service, Michael Douglas.
Well, and it's interesting too, because you sort of draw his genealogy a little bit. I mean, he is the prototype for the Nepo baby, right? The son of Kirk Douglas, who played Spartacus. And you make the distinction, like the roles that Kirk Douglas was taking back in his era, which was sort of like the golden age of patriarchy. He was playing gods, essentially.
Gods and devils. Yeah. I mean, the whole gamut of, every sort of masculine archetype, cowboys and artists and political leaders and so on. And then Michael Douglas has a much more limited range, and not in the sense of what he can act, but just what we wanted from men in that time, I guess. Or at least what we wanted a realistic man to be doing at that time. Because, the 80s was also Schwarzenegger and Stallone and all these super pumped up, exaggerated forms of masculinity. We wanted that too. We always want the fantasy along with that. But Michael Douglas had a much more sort of he kept being called the new sex symbol of the new masculinity. And I thought that was interesting because, in the movies, he's having a really hard time, right? Like he's waving his arms around and screaming and it's like, why is this happening to me? You know, in every single film. And I thought that's funny that he's a sex symbol for the new masculinity. That means the new masculinity is just in a constant hysterical fit. So that's fun. You know, it's fun to think about as a writer.
I will say with like, you know, a few exceptions, I'm thinking, cause I'm a child of the 80s, like all those, like the Schwarzenegger, Stallone, the Michael Douglas, those are the movies I was kind of raised on. I'm older than you, but I think we're close to the same generation. I'm born in 75. So I was like, what, 10 to 15. And I remember distinctly watching Romancing the Stone. That was a big movie for me as a kid. And the Jack T. Colton character was heroic to me. Like there are certain characters in movies as a child that you're like, I kind of want to be like that guy. Like he's cool. Like that's what I thought of him because he was like in the jungle collecting birds and living off the grid.
Smuggler. Bird smuggler in Colombia. Sure, man. Yeah, that's what you're smuggling. Mm-hmm. Great.
Yeah. And he was anti-establishment. He was just kind of living off the, it was great. But
knew how to fly a plane or something. I don't know what was going on in that movie, but
But that was like a poppier and more quintessentially like heroic role for him and kind of comedic too. It was, it was a big hit, but I think that he made more complicated choices, both as a producer and as an actor, like to his credit, and took on roles where he was more vulnerable and was kind of demonstrating a new kind of masculinity or like a new reaction to the changing times in his roles. And, very different from Kirk Douglas and the era that he lived in. And one of the things I want to say as a sidebar, because it's come up a lot so far in the conversation, is with Basic Instinct and how you were watching it a lot during the pandemic. I think I was watching it a lot too, because it was just cycling on Showtime or whatever it was that I was flipping through. And I think I hadn't seen it in a minute. It's an incredibly cinematic film. Like it's got its problems, like at the story level, but the visual look of that film, I'm no great film historian, but it feels kind of like Hitchcockian or something. Like it's got this of great look to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's about a murderous blonde in San Francisco. I mean, it's Hitchcock, sort of obvious ode to Hitchcock. I love Verhoeven. I have to say, like he's one of my favorite directors because he's smart, but he knows how to show the audience a good time. And that's kind of his priority. So he has his politics. He has like a very specific worldview, but he's also deeply invested in entertaining the audience. And I respect that. Like I huge Verhoeven fan, I have to say.
Was that a Joe Esterhaus script? Because he's problematic, isn't he? Like, I don't know. Again, like I don't have like
hugely. God bless his little Hungarian heart. Yeah. He's like a devotee of Orban, I think, at this point. But I also like that. I like that combo of like the dummy and the intellectual working together to create like a smart pervert and a dumb pervert are going to make a really good movie together. And I think that's what happened with Verhoeven and Esterhaus, because the Showgirls, Basic Instinct, double feature. I mean, that's a crowd pleaser right there.
It's like an American classic.
I mean, Verhoeven understood the United States better than any director in the United States, right? Like he just understood how it's sliding towards fascism. He understood that love and sex in the United States is just like a elaborate form of punishment and torture. And yeah, I love Verhoeven.
So when we think about masculinity as it stands today, because you're looking back at these Michael Douglas films, which, I think most, if not all of them, were released in the 80s and 90s, right? That's sort of where it caps. And what about today? Like, where do you think we are today? Have things gotten better or worse for men and with masculinity since then?
Worse. I mean, worse. Because at least you had some kind of stability in the 80s and 90s, even if it was like crumbling. Now we don't have anything, right? Now it's just like we're all Jack T. Colton trying to get across a ravine with like a shitty vine because the bridge is broken. So I think that also we have the problem of no one wants to talk about what the real problems are. Everyone just wants to talk about the symptoms. And there's so much about we're addicted to our smartphones and we're on social media and that lets us dehumanize people and blah, blah, blah. And that's great. And it's true. But there are underlying forces that for whatever reason we've decided just not to look at. And I think that, you know, one of the reasons why I wanted to make it very clear from the beginning that I think there's no more patriarchy is that I think that the belief, you know, when people sort of just casually talk about, oh, we're living under patriarchy, it's like, we can vote. So I'm pretty sure that's not true. But I think it prevents solidarity. And part of that is because it allows men to still think that they're in control when they're not, just by virtue of being men. That's not true. And I think that they cling to that belief because they don't want to look at the chaos that underlies that. Like, it's okay to feel insecure, but to feel out of control entirely and to acknowledge that you're entirely disempowered is too scary. So we'll just pretend like we're still in control. I don't think that that's very useful or helpful. But it also allows women to demonize men and to prevent solidarity with them because we can say, well, look, who's in charge of everything? We're under patriarchy. We don't have power. Like, again, we do. We kind of do. We might not have the power that we wish to have. But I think that also is why we have such a weird nostalgia within sort of women's media for like Jane Austen, for like Bridgerton, for like these sort of empire waste horror shows of, you know, everything was so good when I was legally obligated to stay with my husband for the rest of my life, even if he tried to murder me. Everything was so good when I couldn't vote because I was just a little baby. So I think that that's part of it. It's like we enjoy the cover of thinking that things work in a way that they don't, because then we don't have to take responsibility for how things actually are.
I'm going to read a quote. I think this is you. This is basically the hallmark of my podcast is me writing down quotes in my notes and not attributing them.
Oh, yeah, no, I do the same thing. Don't worry.
Yeah. So I believe this is you saying, quote, "The same structures that oppress men also oppress women. The financialization of every aspect of human life, the disappearance of the common good, the open-air exploitation of every inch of the earth for profit. This is screwing us all over. We have common goals, so it makes sense for us to work together to solve the problems." I find myself like wanting to clap for that statement. I mean, it's not like the most complicated set of thoughts, but it's something that doesn't get said enough. And I think in particular, the financialization of every aspect of human life, so many people feel that. The side hustles and the constant chasing of money and and then people trying to hoard resources. And there's, especially I think in like masculine culture, there's this tendency to sort of lionize these bros who accumulate a lot of money and a lot of toys. And then there's another piece of it that I think you write about in the book, which is the like proliferation of cyber dads.
Yeah.
Like the Scott Galloways. I mean, there's different varieties of cyber dads, but it's like from Joe Rogan might even be a cyber dad to a lot of guys, or Sam Harris and Scott Galloway, even Andrew Tate to a certain subset of men.
Jordan Peterson.
Yeah. Can you just talk a little bit more about that? Because I think that's a phenomenon that I've sort of borne witness to at a remove and with some like revulsion and then sometimes some interest, but I've never had it articulated quite as well as it was in your book. Yeah.
So essentially, we don't really have, or, you know, people of a certain age don't really have fathers, physical fathers, or biological fathers, or people that we actually know. who can really give us guidance in how to live a life that is stable, that has meaning, etc. Their way of doing things no longer applies to the world that we exist in now. And you see that with the hostility of between younger generations and the boomer generations, just an inability to speak the same language, basically. And that leaves a huge space for grifters and cult leaders and con men to come in and say, I know what the problem is. I know how to navigate this space. I know how to create a life. I know what you need to be doing right now to build the kind of life and the kind of future that you want. And just subscribe to my Substack and I'll tell you all about it.
Right.
There's so many of those guys. And obviously some of them have some interesting things to say, but almost all of them do not. I think every once in a while, Scott Galloway will say something that's like almost insightful. And then he runs away from it as quickly as humanly possible. I have like a weird thing with Scott Galloway.
I do too. Because he seems like a more benign cyber dad. I think he's trying hard, but I think that, it doesn't always work out in the execution.
I think he understands that there's a need for somebody who actually understands what's going on, because there's so many con men, right? That you need some sort of figure to volunteer and step in and say, okay, these guys are all wrong and I'm going to show you how they're wrong. But then I don't think that he actually understands the problem either. So he just kind of ends up saying things that are not very helpful. Like his whole thing about the most dangerous person in the world is a lonely man with a gun. I'm like, no, it's Elon Musk, you fucking idiot. It's literally Elon Musk, who has billions and billions of dollars and no oversight. It's him. So anyway, I think that the Jordan Petersons and the Joe Rogans and the whatever, they're really good at sort of describing the problems of men, but they are delusional about where it came from and how to fix it. But if you are just like screaming in pain and you keep being told, walk it off, then you're desperate for someone to tell you that you are right to be experiencing pain, that this is not a phantom, that this is not an exaggeration or performance, that your body is broken, your soul is broken, etc. You just want to hear that. And that makes you, unfortunately, open to the manipulation of, and you know what caused that? Feminism. Or what's going to solve that problem for you? If we take away the right to vote for women. So I think that this is, I think it's a real problem that there's so many volunteers who don't know what they're talking about in this space, willing to go be like, I'm going to get these men into shape. Because if you don't know what you're talking about, then, it's a kind of arrogance to say, I'm going to step in and be all these young men's daddy. But there's, Robert J. Lifton wrote about this, and I found him very helpful when I was trying to write about it, that, young men without father figures, biological fathers, mentors, whatever, men in their lives, are just more susceptible to cult leaders. And certain con men know how to prey on that need for guidance, instruction, and etc. And we just have basically a couple generations now where even if they have fathers in their lives, those fathers aren't going to have useful information because the world is changing so fast. The roles are changing so fast. How to live a meaningful life. How to fuck meaning. How to live a life of not total chaos and privation. It's not, the rule book has changed. You can't just tell somebody well, go to college and you'll get a good job and then you'll get married. Like, it doesn't work. It doesn't work anymore. And the more you try to like enforce that and just tell them, the sort of more you're dooming these kids / men.
Well, there's like a lot of mythology that I think people hold on to. Another couple of words that come to mind as I listen to you and as I was reading your book are like speed and anger. I think that the speed of change in contemporary life, like technological change, cultural change, economic change, geopolitical change, like all of this stuff is coming at people faster than ever before. I think some of this is tied to the technology and it's hard to keep up. And then I think that there can be an anger that really festers when, like you say, people are in a lot of pain and are being told to walk it off, or they are made to feel like it's like really like primarily their fault or it's all their fault. And so eventually that's going to boil over. I guess I'm curious to hear you talk a little bit more about how the anger that we see and the aggression that we see in men today, or at least certain men today, is tied to maybe their refusal to accept the end of patriarchy, and like their desire to preserve or to just deny that American mythology is largely bullshit and that America itself is in decline, like this "Make America Great Again" mantra and this just desire to go back to some halcyon age that never really existed but lives as a myth.
Yeah. Well, I think so much of this goes down to an absence of guidance and an absence of people being honest, right? I don't know if it even comes down to honesty. I think a lot of people who are in positions of power and influence don't understand how the world works, right? And I've sort of had that experience being in the feminist space where the sort of most prominent feminist voices, I'm like, you don't know how you don't understand any of this, right? In that it was very obvious to people who were sort of working on the ground in the feminist movement that abortion rights were going to go away very fast. And there were clear signs that this was happening, that this was in the works. And yet all the sort of professionals who write the opinion pieces for the New York Times, who cover it for the large publications, who are on TV, et cetera, completely blindsided by it. And it's a crazy making experience where you're just being either intentionally lied to, or the people in authority literally don't know what's going on. That's crazy making. And so I think that that's part of it, where the people who have the most influence in American culture are from these very specific small demographics who do not live real lives of precarity or uncertainty like the vast majority of Americans do. So they don't understand what life is like for most people. And so their instructions, their insights are essentially worthless. So I think that's part of it. But I also think that nobody likes to feel like they're sliding out of the position in which they're in, especially if they're not having a good time in that position in the first place. Nobody wants to be in a position of decline. I think that goes for both men and for the United States. But if people aren't helped through developing within themselves adaptability, flexibility, how to manage uncertainty, then, and especially if you have someone constantly telling you, vote for me and I'll just make everything great again, you don't have to adapt. You don't have to change your mind. You don't have to listen to anybody. You don't have to do anything different. Just stay put. Give me your money and your votes and I will fix the world so that it tends to you first again. Like, of course, then that never shows up. and they just get sort of like more and more filled with anger and resentment. And it's constantly misdirected, right? Because the systems are so complex now that how do you fight back against globalized finance, right? You can't, but you can shoot your wife in the fucking face, right? And that'll make you feel good for 0.2 seconds. So it sort of lashes out into misogyny, into, fear of migrants, into social media nonsense, into mass shootings, into whatever. That's easier because at least you can see the results of that action in front of you. And that's, I think, ultimately what people want. They don't want to feel like they don't exist. And I think that a lot of the world, for, 98% of the population of the world, it's designed to make people feel like they don't matter, like they don't exist. They will be forgotten. They will not have an impact on anything. And that's not a great way to live a life.
I think that there's a piece of this too that has something to do with like men feeling aggrieved and put upon and criticized. And I had a conversation on this show and Trump came up and my guest said something that really stuck with me. He's like, the guy's problematic in myriad ways, but he's not a sanctimonious person. Mm. Like Donald Trump is never sanctimonious, at least unless it's like some sort of posture, some sort of like performance of sanctimony, but he's never somebody who is like questioning your morality. And he gives people, his supporters, and I think maybe his male supporters in particular, like this kind of safe space where they don't have to think about their own behavior in a critical way. And they don't have to feel like any kind of sinner. And the way that it's like, you can kind of do whatever you want as long as you donate to me and vote for me.
Sure.
That's his formula.
Yeah. I mean, look, we had for the last 10 years, a political left, quote unquote, that was really just about rearranging the top deck, right? Of let's just, in the elite spaces, let's diversify Harvard, let's diversify the New York Times, and let's not, we just don't give a shit about anybody else without any real material reward. And on top of that, we'll be mean to you about the language that you use or whatever. I know that there were a couple of op-eds after Trump got reelected about how the left went too far and that's why Trump won. No, the left doesn't exist. The left in the United States does not exist. The left was not there. That was the problem. Any sort of fantasy that the New York Times, that Kamala Harris and the rest of the Democratic Party, that the Ivy League universities represent in any way some sort of leftist support system is just absolute nonsense. And I think that we have been for so long without real leftist representation, political representation, artistic representation, cultural representation, that now we confuse a rainbow flag put in the window of a bank that just evicted, a 98-year-old lady as some sort of like leftist representation.
Yeah. I mean, I think like when you think about like Western democracy globally and the political spectrum, like the argument I've made over and over again over the years is that like whatever constitutes the American left would be like at best centrist or like center right in most Western democracies, right? Not that I have like on the ground experience living in a lot of these places, but most of these places, but that's certainly the way that it seems.
Yeah. My husband's from Colombia, and I had this moment a couple of years ago where a woman was trying to cancel me online on social media, and I kind of messaged her about it. I was like, if you have a problem with me, you can email me directly. And so she emailed me directly, and it was from an email address. It was from Penn. It was from Penn. She's a professor at Penn. That's who it turns out to be. And she said she was going to cancel me for not being a good communist. And I was telling this to my husband, and he said, has she built a car bomb before? No, then she's not a communist.
Yeah, she doesn't have her bona fides.
Yeah, it's just not real. She can't criticize me for being a not good communist. I'm not even a communist, so I don't know why she's trying to cancel me for not being a good communist. But if you haven't blown up a building, you can't call yourself a communist either.
Well, I get, and this is kind of a sidebar, but it's related to my next line of questioning, which is like pathways forward, like where things are going. That's kind of where your book wraps up. It contains a lot more than what we've talked about, but I definitely want to touch on that. But on a related note, I would just be curious to get your take on the primary for the New York mayor race. I mean, it's been a big story in the days leading up to our conversation, and it feels emblematic of like a lot of the unrest that we've been talking about. It makes me feel a little bit hopeful. Like I like to see a genuine leftist perspective be platformed and have some success. I mean, that right or no?
Sure. I honestly, I hope the best for him. I think it's a mistake to confuse what happens in New York City with having anything to say with the United States in general. And I think, so I see a lot of like the mistakes of the past being recreated with this guy, leftist mayors, leftist sort of politicians in general have not proven themselves to be very effective at actual governance. I don't know if that's going to be the case or not. I hope he gets things done that he wanted done. But when leftists have been put into positions of power in the recent past, nothing has worked out. And part of that is because American politics is extremely hostile to leftist goals. And so people will do anything that they can to thwart these specific efforts. And so it's kind of an impossible task. But also, there's this tendency to not take anything seriously unless it's happening in New York, which I find very strange. Like, I was living in Baltimore when Brandon Scott became mayor there. He has been an exceptional mayor. The homicide rate in Baltimore has plummeted under his watch. But he didn't take sort of leftist sloganing. He didn't do the defund the police sloganing. He didn't do, so he doesn't line up with what the leftists want. And because of that, he has been an extremely thoughtful and exceptional leader. And to not see any of the same sort of love and attention for Brandon Scott that Mamdani is getting is just like, we, as a sort of political left, which is not really even a real left, we're so obsessed with celebrity. We're so obsessed with social media. We're so obsessed with the right language, the right slogans, the right, lingo and credentials and all of that. And we forget that what people need are their lives improved. And that's kind of the end of that. People treat American politics like sports, and nothing good comes of that. So yeah, I wish him well. Honestly, I'm not against him. I'm not saying we should have elected Cuomo because, at least then he knows how to get whatever the fuck, like that pervert. Don't let him near anybody. But at the same time, the talk around him, I just find kind of exhausting. So I'll wait and see what happens.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be hard to live up to the hype at this point, right? Like people get so excited and they have like these really idealistic visions. And then, like you say, there's so much internal hostility within like the systems of American politics to any kind of leftist goal. that it's hard to get anything done. And then if you don't get it done, then people become deflated and they become angry and they, you know, their idealism is punctured and they end up blaming you. And then it just sets the cause, you know,
yeah. I mean, it's the AOC thing all over again. And I don't really know. I don't really understand what AOC is doing necessarily, but the eagerness with which people turned on her, I thought was alarming. As soon as there was any sort of compromise that she was willing to take on, I was like, this is politics. This is how politics works. Yeah.
Yes, I've had that argument so many times where I'm just like talking to friends of mine on the left, and I'm like, look, you do understand how this system functions. So they're like, well, they didn't get it done. I'm like, they don't have control of the House or the Senate. And they're like, so? And it's like, okay, I don't know how to have a conversation with somebody about that. Like, we can change the system if you think the system needs to be changed, but that's going to take a lot. Like, there are just realities to the way government in a government like ours works, and it's numbers at a certain point.
Yeah, I think there's a real nostalgia for 1968 in the United States, which is very funny to me because none of that worked, right? It's like, but when the campus protests started, they're like, "Oh, this is just like 1968 when they took over Columbia." Isn't that didn't do anything either? But everyone got so excited that it was happening again. But because there's no real lived experience in the United States for real leftist politics, then people get nostalgic for what looks like leftist politics. And what looks like leftist politics are things like, you know, the protests against the Vietnam War or whatever, which were not effective. And so it's hard to come up with any new ideas, and it's hard to get anybody to organize around something that might actually be effective. And one of the reasons why this is so frustrating is because we are surrounded by nations that have had extremely successful leftist movements that have provided real and lasting change. And if we would just talk to them, we could learn about real political leftist organization. But I think that, you know, this comes down to what I was talking about in the book about men not wanting to have solidarity with women because they perceive women as having less status, of being lower on the hierarchy than them, and they don't want to associate because they don't want to be associated with being lower status. I think the United States perceives every other nation as being lower status, even people on the left. So there's no real solidarity with movements in South America. There's no real solidarity even with the protesters of France, right? Because the people who have been leading the protests in France over the last decade have been farmers, right? Who are not using the leftist language that the American left prefers, and so on. But there's a perception that if we lower ourselves to create a sense of solidarity with Hong Kong, with Argentina, with, you know, whoever, then we will be accepting the fact that we are sliding down into a decline. And I think that the United States is absolutely in a state of decline, but we are so terrified of recognizing that and acknowledging it as if the acknowledgement of it will make it worse or bring it on quicker, that we protect ourselves by essentially shooting ourselves in the foot in this particular way and not getting anything actually done.
So let's talk a little bit about the future. And like where things are headed or where you hope things are headed, you know, like more broadly speaking, I guess, but also in particular with regard to patriarchy and the crisis of masculinity. Like what's a future worth striving for?
I mean, a future worth striving for is one of solidarity, where we stop the kind of bullshit language around patriarchy, where feminism understands that it has no real goals without the inclusion of men, without at least conceptualizing the inclusion of men. So it's not about what makes our lives better, what makes everyone's lives better. That's the only thing I think is worth doing. But I'm more concerned that we're just going to get Christian nationalism, that we're just going to get these weirdos, trad calves, just saying that we have to give up the right to vote, that we have to accept our biological destiny as nurturers, et cetera, et cetera. I will not say that that is feminism's fault if it happens, but I do think there's no way forward around that without a sense of shared purpose and solidarity and shared goals.
Yeah. I mean, I've had this thought that it's like everybody wants Trump to go, right? Like we got to get rid of this guy. He's a beast. He's, unfeeling, uncaring, all of the critiques. And I've had the thought like, well, what does he get replaced with? Like, let's say he croaks tomorrow and then suddenly it's President J.D. Vance. Like, I'm not sure if I don't think that's better.
That's worse. Yeah. That's worse because Trump will do whatever he wants to do in the moment that he's doing it, right? And so he's a Gemini. He's unpredictable, right? He turns to the light of who's ever paying him attention and telling him how great he is, right? J.D. Vance has a vision of the world, and it's disgusting. It is a terrible version of the world that he wants to bring about, and he is sincere about it. And I'm much more scared of J.D. Vance than I am of Donald Trump. Because I think, fine, let's build an 80-foot golden statue of Donald Trump, like in Central Park. Let's just do it. Like, if that's what it takes to distract him, to keep him from killing us in a war with Iran, then let's just do it. Like, let's just all pretend like we like him until the next, 3.5 years. And this is over. But if he died, we have to keep him alive. We have to keep him alive long enough to get J.D. Vance away from power because I'm so much more scared of him than I am of Donald Trump.
Yeah, the thought has occurred to me too that like J.D. Vance and whatever cohort of like oligarchs and religious leaders are in his corner. It seems to me that they're like, we want him to be president, and it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if Trump were to go away, like the Peter Thiels, like,
yeah.
Like I think they have a strategy and they have like a twisted, but like they have an intellectual thing that they're doing. It's a project that they're trying to actualize, and Trump's actually impeding it in a certain sense. So There's been a thought that like, would there be a coup, or would there be some kind of nefarious effort made to get rid of him somehow so that they could seize power?
Well, this is kind of what I was talking about with like the people who are in the most prominent positions in the media don't seem to understand how the world works. Like the sort of Christian nationalist movement of like Moscow, Idaho, and those specific churches are so scary and influential, and it doesn't seem like it sort of enters the discourse at all. I listen to this podcast a lot called Sons of Patriarchy. I'm sort of adjacent to some of this stuff. Like my family was just sort of like Protestant, very boring. We just want to have a potluck in a basement, like we just want to make a casserole for 8 to 12 people. And share it with our neighbors. But then I have like this, in the extended family with my cousins, this real crazed evangelical, charismatic weirdness that is very much about managing the boundaries between the genders, fertility, real mind control stuff of like, you're not supposed to watch movies that aren't approved by your church, or TV shows, or read books, or, do anything. You're supposed to homeschool. Like it's like real indoctrination and no outside influence whatsoever. And those people scare the shit out of me. And they've been doing, my cousins have been doing missionary work since they were 18 years old. And it's strange to not see that in any way in the culture. Like it's sort of unacknowledged, and it's a presence, and it has growing influence, and it concerns me. And I see it in JD Vance. And I just wish somebody would tell the truth about JD Vance.
Yeah, I think it's coming. I think it's good, especially if he were to ever ascend. I think, when people actually got a good look at him, I think it would terrify a lot of us. There's something very sinister about him. And does he wear eyeliner? Have we gotten a verdict on that?
I'm pretty sure he does. Yeah, because it changes, right? Like some people just have like a dramatic lash, but he does not. He seems, it comes and goes. Yeah. So I think he's got like a too heavy hand. He needs to hire, again, if women and gay people liked him, he would have the voice telling him, like, you gotta be a little bit more subtle with your line. You can't do the waterline. Don't do outside the lash. It's too obvious. But yeah, no, I feel like I understand JD Vance to some extent, and that's why I don't trust him.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk to you a little bit before we part company about just like your life and your career, because you've been on my radar for a long time in the literary world, like going back to Book Slut, which I believe you started when you were 23.
Yeah. Yeah.
And was like a big presence in the aughts, like in, the literary online world.
Yeah. 2002, I think is when I did that.
Yeah. How was 2002 23 years ago? That's the part that I have trouble with. Like, where did those 23 years go?
Oh, I feel it in my bones. I know where they went, but
yeah, right. But you're originally from Kansas,
mm-hmm.
and you mentioned like potlucks and casseroles and basements, like all of that stuff. I was just internally nodding because I'm from Wisconsin and Indiana, and there was a lot of that, a lot of church basements in my youth, a lot of donut Sundays, and that kind of stuff. And there's some virtue to that. Like I do have some nostalgia for it. It's not a bad place to be raised, but I'm interested in just hearing how you went from there to here, because I feel like, you're such a smart person and like very well read and kind of urbane. Like that's the way that if I met you on the street, I'd be like, whoa, she must be from like the Upper West Side or something. Like, I don't know. Or just like, I'm curious because it's not the most likely path for somebody from, I believe it's a small town in Kansas.
Yeah. 1,200 people.
Yeah. So just talk a little bit about how that happened.
Well, listen, some of the most provincial people I've ever met in my life are from New York City. So, I don't think it's necessarily an advantage to be from New York City. No, I started, in 2002, you could just do things. You could just do them on the internet. It didn't matter. And so I started a blog because it didn't matter and it didn't have to mean anything. And I wasn't thinking about, I have to brand myself, like now you have to have a business plan to do anything, to like write a tweet. You have to be like, well, what does it say about my brand? How can I monetize this in 3 years' time? So there wasn't any of that. I just started a blog because I was bored at my job because I think the person who had my job before me was an idiot because there was just not very much to do. So I had like an hour and a half of work and then I was just like, oh, I'm at a computer. I'm going to start a blog. So yeah, it was just kind of that. And I spent all my time reading books. So why not have it be about that? So it was I'm not going to say it was a more innocent time, but it was a time when you didn't have to professionalize. And that there wasn't an expectation that you would. And that was very useful to me because if I had thought about people even reading the blog or what this was going to say about me or how I was going to turn this into a career, I never would have done it. There's no sense of play anymore in the arts, especially. Like the arts is just like so professionalized and overstuffed with people who are so desperate to have an interesting life that they never start to live it. that I think that it takes all of the sort of fun out of it. So we started it for fun. I started it by myself, and then people started to read it. And so I was like asking my friends, like, do you want to help me with this? Because people are reading this and I don't have enough to say to fill all the space and time. And so they did. So it was just all of me and my friends having a good time. That was it. And then it accidentally turned into something because then I couldn't get a job because you Googled my name and then and they're like, you're not going to do your job. So we're hiring you you're going to do this. I was like, yeah, no shit. But I can do the job that you want me to do very quickly. But they didn't buy it. So yeah, I had to start writing for money, but yeah, that's how things kind of started working.
And it was mostly criticism in the beginning, like professionally for money?
Criticism, editing stuff, column stuff, some political stuff kind of at the beginning because it was a weird time for feminism after 9/11. And so there was like a real desire for a different kind of feminist perspective on the kind of slide toward, with George W. Bush and the beginning of the threat to abortion rights and the beginning of the reemergence of pro-life terror. So it was always sort of intertwined. Politics and art was always sort of intertwined for me.
Well, something that I think you've become known for as like a thinker and a critic is like a kind of fearlessness. And I think that's just something that I respond to when I read your work is that I'm like, oh, okay, she has an opinion. And she's not afraid to have a strong opinion or to maybe have an unpopular opinion. And I love that because I feel like it's increasingly rare. Like everyone's so scared to offend anybody or to somehow earn the ire of like the internet masses or whatever. And you, at least to my eye, don't seem to have that. Like, A, is that true? And if so, why not?
I think I just never learned how to professionalize, right? Like I didn't go to college. So I didn't have a sense of what is good and bad for a career. And certainly having strong opinions is bad for your career. It's bad for your career. I get an email every once in a while from like someplace like the New York Times. They're like, you were very negative toward the use of feminist rhetoric in supporting Hillary Clinton. What do you think about this female politician? And then I'll actually say it. And they're like, we can't use this. So they won't give me the job. But it's funny every time it happens. But yeah, no, I just don't think I ever really learned how to be a professional. And there's good parts of that and then bad parts of that. The bad parts of it is you don't really get very much money. But the good parts of it is like, in the sense of William James in his essay about this, like if you're used to financial hardship, then you can't have a blackmailed soul. So I think that's nice. I prefer that than to be compromised.
Well, yeah. I mean, at least like I think what I was kind of driving at when I was asking my question earlier is that this just feels like authentic to me in a way that's like refreshing. A lot of times somebody will be opining and you can kind of feel the layers of self-protection being built within the criticism or something. And like, I might not always agree with your take, but I feel like, this is an honest broker. Like this is somebody who's really put some thought into it and is giving me her honest to God opinion. And I just appreciate it.
I feel like when I read a lot of criticism, mostly what I'm reading is somebody's idea of they want to be a critic 20 years from now. And so they're telling me things now that will protect the next 20 years of their career rather than telling me what they actually think. And I think part of that is like criticism is not easy, right? And I think that we have sort of told a bunch of people that literary criticism, art criticism is just about, you just have to have an opinion. You just have to give your point of view. But you have to have a sense of self, A. you also have to have like a kind of character and intellectual development to base it on, and a sort of historical sense. Because when I read, like, the hot new writer, mostly what I'm getting is a sort of political judgment on a work of art or on a particular creator. So it's easier to say, this person has bad politics and this is how they manifest in the novel, than to tell me whether or not the novel works. The political level is a very easy one to kind of diagnose and figure out what might be wrong with it. And we're also certain that that's what really matters in anything, is the politics of something, that we forget that anything else exists. And then of course you have like the emergence of the new right within letters and art that are coming at it either from that same angle of just like, we need to replace the leftist politics with right-wing politics, which is just like a disaster. Or you have this like purely fascist aesthetics is the only thing that matters, and that's its own nightmare. But either way, people are only paying attention to the politics of anything that happens in the culture. And I think that that's bad for art making. And I think it's bad for criticism as well, because if it's an easy way in and out of an object to just sort of try to figure out whether or not the creator cares about trans rights or cares about healthcare reform. Right.
Well, there's, like you say, it's like criticism is not easy. I think it can be easy, but it won't be good. I think it's good criticism is hard. And there's got to be a lot that goes into it. And I'm talking to you and you're sitting, as many of my guests are, like they're sitting in front of a bookshelf packed with books. But you mentioned that you didn't go to college and you're extremely well read and self-educated. I didn't realize that. I didn't know that. But that like you kind of took your own education.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah. Well, I wasn't going to be able to go to Harvard anyway, so it didn't really matter one way or the other. But no, I think you have to take things seriously. I would say that the things I take the most seriously are my brain and my life. Those are the things that I prioritize, right? I want to always be thinking and learning and getting new perspectives on something. And I want to live a life that I find interesting. And the rest of it is not a high priority for me. I don't really care if I make that much money. I don't really care if I have powerful friends. I don't really care if the New York Times likes my book or not. That's sort of outside my control, a lot of that, but also it's outside of just like my priorities.
Incidentally, the New York Times likes your book. I just
one. Yeah. I was worried because they told my publicist that they were going to review it, and I was like, oh, I've said too many things about the New York Times recently. There's no way this is going to go well.
But it did. It did.
It was fine.
Well, before I let you go, I have to ask: has Michael Douglas read this book, and do you hope that he does? If you're not aware,
I was desperately hoping that he would not know that it existed, but I was sent a picture of Michael Douglas holding my book, so that's all the information I have. I have no idea if he read it or if somebody just handed it to him, but he knows that it exists, and that's honestly, it gave me a panic attack. I was like texting people in all caps being like, help, help, please help me. I need a Klonopin. Does anybody have a Klonopin? But yeah, no, I didn't want him to read it because I didn't want to live in a world where it was possible that Michael Douglas thought I was an idiot. I just thought it was safer if you just didn't find out about the book. But
listen, I got to push back. As reading this book, I was like, I really hope he does read it. I think like as a celebrity, somehow you're written about, or it's not good to read your own press,
sure.
Right? But like a comprehensive, critical take on his work and its impact and how it's related to other aspects of our culture, I think he would find it like super interesting and possibly like illuminating in useful ways or something as a matter of self-understanding even, and so I'm rooting for Michael Douglas to read this book, and then at some point for the two of you to somehow meet.
No. I would spontaneously combust. I think the reason why I'm uncomfortable with it is because it was written as an act of love. If I write something very negative about something, I hope they see it. Like I have that in me, that sort of underdog, go fuck yourself. I have it. I have that deep in me. But I wrote it out of a tremendous amount of love for him and the work that he did and that era of film and all the rest of it. And so that I think is why it makes me uncomfortable. The thought of him reading it is like, oh no, he'll know that I love him.
Have you seen Michael Douglas's Instagram?
I love it so much.
I mean, I am obsessed with his Instagram. It's like, I was just describing this to a friend. I was like, it's like if you gave like, almost like a prehistoric man, like an iPhone or something. He's just holding it up and just kind of talking
into it,
just riffing.
The best thing about Michael Douglas's Instagram is that every time one of his friends has a birthday, he will post a photo of him and that friend on Instagram. And in the photo, he always looks better than the friend does. He always looks amazing. And the friend is always like caught off guard or something, or just like slightly disheveled. And so Michael Douglas is like, Libra superstar. Uh-huh. And then Danny DeVito has got, like a button under, like there's just something. It's so wonderful. It's so amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. I had a feeling you were a connoisseur, but I had to at least flag it in case not. My sister does that incidentally. There's never been a picture on display in my older sister's house where she isn't the best looking person in the photo.
Yeah. Good for her. She's got it figured out.
Yeah. Well, Jessa, it's a delight to meet you and to talk with you. And I really enjoyed your book.
Thank you.
Again, it is called What's Wrong with Men? There's no question mark, but you can imply one or you can add one. Yeah, you can add it. And it's out there now. I wish you well. And I always end by asking my guest if they're working on anything new. So do you have anything else in the pipeline?
Yes. I will just say that I was thinking after this that I was going to write an entire book about the Japanese filmmaker Kiyoshi Kurosawa. And then I realized only 3 people are going to read that. And I really only wanted to do it as a excuse to watch Cure 18,000 times like I did Basic Instinct. But I've abandoned it, unfortunately, for the world and the 3 people that were going to read that book.
I think I would have read it.
Doing something else.
Can you say what it is, or do you not even know yet?
We'll see what happens. I think it's about tradcaths. I'm sort of digging into it, and I think it's going to turn into a book. But yeah, the whole tradcath phenomenon, that's my next target.
So for people listening, as she was saying that, I was, that Jack Nicholson GIF or whatever, where he's nodding, he's smiling and nodding. That's what I was doing. Well, Jessa was saying, I think you should write about that. You're a great person to write about that. So we'll look forward to it. Thank you so much for the time, and congrats again.
Thank you.
Okay, there we have it. That was my conversation with Jessa Crispin. Totally enjoyable. Great to have her on the show. The new book is called What's Wrong with Men? Patriarchy, The Crisis of Masculinity, and how, of course, Michael Douglas films explain everything. What's Wrong with Men is available now from Pantheon, wherever books are sold. Be sure to check it out. Be sure to check out Jessa Crispin on the internet. Let me make sure what her website is. I know she's got The Culture We Deserve on Substack, right? And then she's also at jessacrispin.com, and you can follow her on Instagram. Don't forget to subscribe to this show wherever you listen. You can also subscribe on YouTube, and you can follow me on Bluesky and Instagram. Sign up for my email newsletter over at bradlisti.substack.com. And if you're a regular listener, if you tune in week after week, if you get something from this program and you appreciate the work that I do, I hope you'll join the Otherppl Patreon community over at patreon.com/otherpplpod. If you want to get an Otherppl t-shirt or a sweatshirt, or if you want to join the Otherppl book club, you can do that at otherppl.com, the show's official website. If you want to join the wait list for How to Write a Novel, the debut course from my new company, Deep Dive, you can do that at www.deepdive.audio. A reminder that Deep Dive will be launching soon. Last but not least, if you have 2 minutes and you want to do me a favor, I hope you will rate this podcast wherever you listen. Give it a rating, write a little review. It helps the show find new listeners. All right, so coming up on Thursday, I will be joined by my friend and co-host Mira Gonzalez for a new episode of Brad and Mira for the Culture. And we will assess popular culture for your edification and entertainment. You know, I say all of this, and it's always touch and go. I think we're going to have a new episode. We usually have a new episode. But with Mira, you never know. You just don't know. So you're going to have to wait and see. Brad and Mira for the Culture coming up, I think, on Thursday.